So, how do you pull off a tech career that lasts more than 30 years? I mean, in an industry that basically reinvents itself every couple of years, that's a huge deal. Today, we're going to deconstruct one person's actual career summary and turn it into a playbook we can all learn from. All right, let's dive in.
So right off the bat, we see this in the executive summary. Look, we've all seen resumes stuffed with buzzwords, right? Self-motivated, result-oriented. They can start to sound a little hollow. But here's the thing. What if, for this career, these aren't just buzzwords? What if they're actually the secret sauce, the literal keys that opened every single door? Let's see if the evidence backs it up.
And that brings us to the big question, really. What does that journey from engineer to a global leader actually look like? You know, we always see the starting line, and then we see the finish line. But all the good stuff, the messy middle, all those critical pivots and big wins, that's where the real lessons are. So we're going to map it out.
All right, so here's how we're going to break it down. We'll look at the engineering foundation, then the climb into leadership. Check out the impact on a global scale, and then, at the end, we'll decode the entire success playbook.
Okay, Section 1, the engineering foundation. Look, every solid tech career has to start with, well, the tech. But the real story, the interesting part, usually kicks off with that first major pivot. You know that moment you go from just building the thing to really understanding how to sell the thing.
And this is what's so cool about what we're doing today. We are working directly from the source material. This isn't some sanitized, perfectly polished story someone wrote down years after the fact. Nope, this is the raw career summary, role by role. It makes this whole breakdown so much more authentic. Okay, check this out. This timeline just perfectly lays out that first critical pivot. He starts at Texas Instruments in '93 as a straight-up hardware design engineer. But then, just 2 years later, boom, he's a senior application engineer. That's a huge step, right? It's the bridge between the engineers and the actual customers. And then a few years after that, the final leap, business development manager. This wasn't just stumbling around. This was a super intentional move toward the business side of things.
And did that move pay off? Oh yeah, big time. Over 1.5 million. That's how many units of the Nokia 5510 MP3 phone shipped with his design win using a TI Audio DSP. It's such a perfect example, isn't it? When you get closer to the customer, you get closer to where the real impact happens.
Okay, so with that technical and business foundation locked in, we move into the next phase, the leadership climb. This is where the focus shifts from being a high-impact individual to leading whole teams and, as we'll see, taking on some pretty big Goliaths. So his first major leadership test comes at a company called Genic. And I want you to just think about the challenge here. He had to set up the company's very first sales office outside their home country. He had to build an entire partner ecosystem for their tech from the ground up. I mean, this is pure startup hustle. You're out there finding manufacturing partners, convincing those first key customers like China Steel to take a chance on you, literally creating a market that didn't exist before.
And the result? Just wow. He didn't just compete, he went on to capture over 50% of the market share in Greater China. And get this, who was he up against? Giants like Freescale and Texas Instruments, his old company. That's not just winning, that's out-strategizing the very players that define the industry.
And this wasn't a one-hit wonder. The playbook absolutely worked again at his next stop, PLX Technology. The numbers speak for themselves, right? We're talking about building a business unit to over $30 million in annual revenue while grabbing more than 80% of the market. This is a pattern of consistent, measurable success. But you know, there's a really interesting subplot running through this whole story. Genic gets bought by NXP. Then PLX gets bought by Broadcom. The tech world is just constant consolidation, right? So being able to not just survive, but thrive through multiple acquisitions, that's a superpower. Remember that word adaptive from the very beginning? Well, this is exactly what it looks like.
All right, so that acquisition of PLX lands him inside Broadcom, which is an absolute giant in the semiconductor world. And this presents a totally new kind of challenge. The question becomes, how do you keep making a big impact when you go from a relatively small, nimble company to a massive global corporation?
This comparison really spells it out. At PLX, the job was to build a $30 million business from the ground up, right? Managing local teams, handling big accounts. But at Broadcom, the scale just explodes. Now it's about aligning a global account strategy. It's not about one product line, it's about promoting the entire corporate franchise. You shift from directly managing a P&L to influencing this huge, complex machine.
Okay, so we've walked through the engineering foundation, the leadership climb, and the global impact phase. Now it's time to pull it all together. Let's decode this playbook and see what skills, both the hard and the soft, really made it all happen.
First, let's look at the soft skills playbook. All these things listed here, we've seen them in action, right? That strategic thinking was crystal clear in that deliberate pivot at Texas Instruments. Those strong negotiation skills, well, you don't get 80% market share without them. And that's the key takeaway here. These aren't just nice-to-have personality traits. They are professional tools that were used to get very real, very impressive results.
But, and this is a huge but, none of that business success happens without this, the hard skills playbook. This deep technical foundation in system design, in embedded SoCs, in C and assembly, that never went away. It's what gave him the credibility to lead engineering teams, to talk to customers, to build a strategy. You just can't fake this stuff. It's the bedrock the entire career was built on.
So when you boil it all down, the story is pretty clear, isn't it? You start with a rock-solid technical foundation. Then you very deliberately layer on business acumen, leadership, and that all-important adaptability. That combination is just incredibly powerful. It makes you resilient to industry changes, and it makes you incredibly valuable. So as we wrap this up, the real question isn't just about this one career, it's about yours. Looking at this blueprint, what's the next chapter you're going to write in your playbook?